No kid ever went to bed at night, got tucked in, and said, "Mommy, please tell me a statistic." Like that. No, but that's right. Like that's never happened.
Welcome to the Medical Sales Accelerator Podcast. I'm Zed Williamson.
And I'm Clark Wiederhold.
This podcast exists to put scale to the value you get from those great one-to-one conversations at conferences and sales meetings.
You know you have momentum behind you. You're building a great team, but will your team be legendary in your space?
That's why we're speaking with our guest today, Gair Maxwell. He has a lifelong fascination with all things legendary. Today, that curiosity extends to dissecting how the world's top brands become simply irresistible. He's the author of Big Little Legends, How Everyday Leaders Build Irresistible Brands. Gair, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, fellas. It's great to be here on the Medical Sales Accelerator, all the way from Greater Covington, Louisiana, which I believe New Orleans is just in the suburbs. Isn't that how it works?
Exactly. Just right behind us.
Yeah, no, it's
can smell the beignets from here.
Well, exactly. In fact, chapter 6 in the book is devoted to Cafe Du Monde, right in your backyard, fellas. You've got hundreds of coffee shops to choose from, but only one is swarming with customers night and day. And as you mentioned, Zed, that's what I set out many years ago to figure out, well, why? What are the commonalities of a Cafe Du Monde, of a Pike Place, for example, in Seattle, Washington, of Weber's, a Northern Ontario hamburger stand. I call it word of mouth heaven on Highway 11. What's common and what makes people line up down the street and around the block the same way they line up every time Apple releases a brand new phone? Why do people line up? And I'm anxious to share with your audience, some thoughts on how, folks can rethink how they go about their marketing.
Yeah, and I think, when it's pretty easy to imagine teams being excited about their product, right?
Yes.
They know why it's good. They know what's exciting for in this world, patients. There's a patient out there suffering, and if only it's possible that maybe this patient doesn't suffer anymore. And many times in this industry, because of regulation, because of the time it takes to get to market with clinical trial, and because the audience that many times the people listening to this podcast are actually selling to are surgeons who are, they steep in data.
Right.
So what is it generally that these people are doing wrong that keeps themselves from becoming legendary?
Let's for a moment, guys, let's park the word wrong. What could they be doing in addition to what they're doing? How's that?
Sure.
Is that fair?
Sure.
Because we have great respect for people, your audience, people who are doing like life and death work. Like that's important stuff, right? The piece that they could augment their current efforts with is so astonishingly simple, and yet even as people watch this and listen to this, they're going to trip themselves up a little bit. So I'll try to explain. I can give a one-word answer. You ready, Zed? Clark?
Go for it.
Story.
So
that's the simple one-word answer. Facts tell, but stories sell. And there's a universal principle at play here in terms of creating legends. For example, the screen behind me, I put this up for a reason, because somebody watching is just itching. They're dying. They're already filling in the blanks of what that story is. And I haven't said a word about it until now, and I won't even talk about the actual story. But I will tell you this, Zed, and you'll appreciate it, and Clark. I remember the guy in Tampa just a few weeks ago when that slide came up on the screen in a live presentation of Big Little Legends. He knew what every symbol meant. He knew the track listing of the album it comes from. Half the audience doesn't know anything about this, but this guy knew it, and knew it deeply, because what did he know? The story. He knew the story. Clark, you're laughing because I can tell you want to weigh in on this.
It just songs from that album have stories to me. So I don't know about necessarily that story, but yeah, the minute I saw it when we jumped on, it elicited memories of that music playing.
Exactly. So we're going to make a secret pact where we're never going to discuss the band or the album, and we'll drive people crazy through this. But at the same time, we'll give them something they can really wrap their heads around. You ready, Clark?
Absolutely.
What's the most famous painting in the world?
The Mona Lisa.
Why? Like, how is it? And this is interesting, guys. Like, about what time are we now? 11:30 Eastern?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the doors at the Louvre are, I think, are going to close about a half an hour from now. All right. So within an hour, half an hour, 30,000 people, Clark, will have walked through, nearly 800,000 square feet of a museum with 35,000 paintings, objects, and artifacts on display. And nearly 99% of the people who lined up and paid $40 a piece for a ticket for that experience today at the Louvre, 99% wanted to see only one painting, and one painting in particular. And I think, again, anyone watching right now or listening, well, why? How did this 30 by 21 portrait, come to occupy prime shelf space in my brain? How did that happen? Right? And so when you dig into it, and we talk about this in chapter 1, so it doesn't matter whether it's medical sales, it doesn't matter whether it's classic rock, it doesn't matter whether it's B2B, B2C, an object, an event, Woodstock, a person, Elon Musk, a place, okay? St. Andrews, Scotland, the Old Course, Cafe du Monde, doesn't matter what it is. I love the story of the Mona Lisa because it illustrates a universal principle around story. And either a story happens to you or you make one happen. In the case of the Mona Lisa, it was August 21st, 1911. And she was, up until that day, she was certainly regarded, but Clark, she wasn't this overwhelming slam dunk, top of mind, undisputed queen of top of mind awareness. And then everything changed that day. And that's the day the Mona Lisa was stolen. And I don't want to ruin chapter 1 for anyone in the book, but when she was stolen, and Zed knows the story a little bit from our program, she got, for a 2-year period while she was gone, she got millions and millions and millions of dollars of free publicity on the only mass media platform of the day, which was newspaper, that no painting ever got before or since. So the theory is, what happens if the thief grabs another small painting and takes it out of the Louvre that day? What do you think would happen?
We might be looking at something better than the Mona Lisa.
Exactly. And that painting would be the winner of the publicity sweepstakes, as it were. So the principle is, art without a story is just paint on a canvas. A business without a story, a compelling story, a riveting, dramatic story, is just another business.
What I want to bring to the audience's attention is there can be stories at every single level, and definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but there are times when you're working for an organization that is so gigantic that maybe the organization does not have the things in place to be able to tell their own story, but you as a representative can actually own your own story as it relates to that massive entity. You can have a personal story that actually makes the connection. Am I off base with that?
No, you're not at all. In fact, in this social world where I think, Zed, you're asking it in the context, if I was in, let's say, medical sales, is that how I would approach this?
Right.
If I was in medical sales, I would be approaching it from the point of view, and I'm just throwing this out there as a possibility of what you could do. Do you have a customer or an end user who has benefited greatly and their life has changed in a significant way?
Of course.
Of course. everyone would have access to that, I would think, right? And I think it's less about the testimonial. It's more about the story of the person. Can you capture that story in such a way that let's make one up right now. Let's give everyone watching and listening a good hypothetical example. Zed, name me a patient.
Billy.
Billy. And what was Billy's ailment?
Billy was, he had massive arthritis in his knee, just really kind of shut him down from playing tennis, which is what he loved.
There you go. Let's use tennis and Billy. But how old is Billy?
52.
52. Does he have grandchildren?
Of course.
Of course.
He likes to get down on the carpet in the living room and play with blocks.
There you go. Could you create that video with Billy down on the carpet playing with Legos or blocks with a 2 or 3-year-old? Could you see Billy also on the tennis court with the 3-year-old, let's say, just making those first awkward stabs at trying to hit a tennis ball, right? Could you weave in the story of Billy's grandchild may not be the next Venus or Serena, but it doesn't matter. They're on the court, right? Could you dramatize Billy's story? And just at the end, Zed, could you just throw it in a little bit about how he's, his love for tennis and love for life has been greatly accelerated when he had a chance to learn more about XYZ medical device.
And I think even a device rep that's out there can even tell their personal story. So let's even remove the idea of videotaping. Sure. But even imagine if they were telling the story from the point of view of one of the children. You know, 30 years ago, I remember finding out that I had to be careful around grandpa because he had bad knees. And now I'm selling knee replacements. And I just, that's why it matters to me. Like, that's people in this world get lost in data and think that decisions are being made black and white, and think that if you have an equation, as long as you have the right numbers, then the equation equals yes. And I think we forget in this industry, especially, we forget the importance of story.
And what we can do with stories, Ed, to your point, is we can actually create where 1 and 1 equals 11. And here's what I mean. Let's just say that medical sales rep, right, could build a personal brand under the umbrella of the big conglomerate. Let's just say, right? Let's just say they pick a storytelling angle very consistent with the values of the parent company. Okay. And for example, let's use, just based on the little Billy example, let's use the word compete as a way, because it's about competing, right? It's about getting back in the game. Get back there. That's even it. There it is. Get back in the game. Could that medical sales rep build a rich library of stories and content around people who get back in the game, and build an audience on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, about getting back in the game? Is getting back in the game something that could be felt universally from LeBron all the way down to everyone in Covington, Louisiana? How many of those stories could be told? There's Ed. That was great. We just created a whole strategy for, but that's Billy, isn't he? What's he trying to do? Get back in the game.
So you've got a lot of people nodding their heads, and they're probably saying, look, I've done this. We've done this. My team, on the marketing team, we're doing this right now for our organization. We've got stories. We're showing the impact. They buy in, and they think they're going down that path. What are some watch outs? What are some areas where you see folks with the right intentions to create the right stories, to create impact and drive behavior change, but they missed the mark, right?
Well, Yeah. That's where I think what comes into play. That's a great question, Clark, is that parent company might be doing those, but are you living and breathing that yourself with your social media platforms and building your own audience? Like, are you actually posting consistent original content? We don't see today anymore. If you want to create the legend, where does it have to be created now? Online on social platforms. That's, and I know this will rub some people the wrong way, because people are very particular about their social media and their feeds and how they present themselves to the world. But unfortunately, fellas, I think the days of newspaper and the yellow pages are kind of dwindling as distribution channels. Does that make sense, Clark, to your question? The answer,
take the tactics off. Where are they missing in the ingredients of the story? Where do you see some missteps taking place where
okay,
they see the impact that they could tell, but
right,
the delivery is off, or the formula is wrong?
Sure. Let me help you with that. Yeah, because there's distribution, which is a whole other issue, right? But I think if I understand the question correctly, it goes to the actual art of storytelling itself.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay. So to create the great story, and I can, give you a very high level view of this online right now. It's like Aristotle with the 3-act play. There must be setup, there must be journey, and then resolution. And my own theory on it is that on the journey, you've got to take them deeper and deeper and deeper into what I call the pit, where you don't know what the outcome's going to be. Netflix is very good at making us binge watch when they take us into the pit of the cliffhanger, and then what do you got to do, Clark? You got to watch the next episode, right? So corporate and business storytelling tends to be very flat and opaque without this dramatic Aristotelian curve, whatever you want to call it. Setup, Billy was this. And then what happened? The stock market crashed. Right?
Yep.
And then, so at some point, there must be crisis. If there's no crisis, if there's no conflict, there is no story. And the deeper the pit, the bigger the payoff coming out the other side.
Yeah, and if you think about movies, I'm a fan
Right.
of movies. I watch a lot with my younger son, and there's some movies you can just, even though you know the storyline, you can see them over and over and over again. One of them for me is, and it's the movie that I turned into a total sobbering baby, but it's Rudy, right? Where you have this, and you know that dip. You go like, oh my gosh, is he going to give up? Is he ever going to get in the game? And then it gets to that point where the janitor's doing the hardcore single man clap. And you got like, I got tears coming out my right eye on the corner. It's like, this is great. But that's what they did, is they took you to a point where you actually thought, is it possible that this guy actually doesn't get on the field?
Yeah, and deep down, Zed, you just brought me along for the ride too, because I've only watched that movie half a dozen times or so, and suddenly you've got me there. He can't quit. He can't. Zed, he can't give up. He's worked too hard, right? And Coach Dan Devine needs to see that, right? So what are we doing? We're all right now on this podcast silently cheering for Rudy. But that's the power. And what we explored in the book, we did Dana Zillick, my partner in business, life, and crime. She's really the research genius behind this. And she identified 30 different scientific and medical studies, which is, I was hoping this would come up, and you brought it up organically. Now, if you put 30 different studies into the book, you don't have a book anymore. You've got a thesis, right? Sure. So
Mhm.
we picked one. We just picked the best story. And the best one comes from a neuroeconomist named Paul Zak. He's out of Claremont, California. He wrote a book called The Moral Molecule. He used blood samples to test the impact on stories. So, Zed, when a story is relevant or meaningful to a person, like Clark felt something for that classic rock logo and that album cover, you and I connected on the story of Rudy. It releases oxytocin, which fuels things like generosity, empathy, trust, connection. It's the love hormone. So, from a storytelling point of view, suddenly the story is no longer a logical exchange, and it's not even emotional. At its deepest, well told level, it's biochemical, right? So, in my view, Hollywood represents and Netflix represent, there's best in the world at storytelling, right?
Yep.
We can do those, Ed, and you just did it, right? That's it. You demonstrated exactly it. It's like my relationship with the movie Moneyball. I think Moneyball is the best business movie ever made. And do you remember when they were losing and losing and losing? Do you remember that, guys?
Oh, yeah.
They're losing. And they're still losing, and the talk shows are just going crazy that Billy Bean, this experiment's not working. Fire the coach, fire the GM, blah 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 blah.
His
And
daughter's
they're
asking him if he's okay.
exactly. Do you remember that? Oh my goodness, how far out on a limb did this guy go for something he absolutely believed in? And then for me, I don't know about you guys, I'd be interested to hear, but for me, it was when he's Brad Pitt's character, or whatever the character played by Brad Pitt is interacting with Peter Brand, played by Jonah Hill. Do you believe in this thing or not? Right? Do you remember that, guys?
Mhm.
Do you believe in this thing or not? Well, then why we have to explain it to anyone anymore? That for me was like, okay, they're going to get out of the pit.
I want to bring two things up. So the first is, so you mentioned oxytocin. I'm glad you did. So Trackable Med is a company that is rooted in an understanding of neuroscience and human behavior. And oxytocin is an important chemical. And what's funny is you were telling the story of the Mona Lisa earlier. It's a piece of art.
Right.
I can say about myself, I enjoy art. I'm not an expert. If we go to a museum, I'll go, that's nice. I can think of one piece of art that if there's ever a replica or something, I always want to see it. And it's The Gates of Hell by Rodin. And what's interesting is because you said Mona Lisa, I went Gates of Hell, Rodin. And I went, why is that? And it's because I grew up near Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. My friends and I would always go destroy the campus skating. Like we were the hardcore, jump off of stuff, be problematic, just wear ourselves to nothing, do a bunch of dumb stuff that we probably should have got hurt a lot worse. And we would always cap the day going to the Rodin Garden, sitting in front of the Gates of Hell, and just having this philosophical discussion, trying to explain the story behind it. And so I bring that up because no one told me a story. It wasn't this crazy thing that happened, but what connected me was oxytocin, right? Because it was tied to a story. And I bring that up because I hadn't thought about it in a while until you just said the words Mona Lisa. But this gives you power as someone who wants to communicate, because there's something else that I do if I ever talk to a private practice physician or employed physician. I always start the conversation with, tell me the story of how you got to where you are today.
Right.
And that question, boom, oxytocin, connection, trust. You actually get this deep understanding of someone very quickly, and you're not even telling the story. All you're doing is asking for it.
Yeah, that's, we could, guys, literally go for hours on this subject, but in the interests of respecting your time and our listeners and viewers, it's so simple. If you think about it, You've got kids or grandkids. Think of, and when you were a little kid, just all you gotta do is think about it, how hardwired humans are. No kid ever went to bed at night, got tucked in, and said, "Mommy, please tell me a statistic." Like that. No, but that's right. Like that's never happened. Right. And so I think what medical sales and marketing professionals need to be aware of, that beyond the data and all of the features, advantages, benefits, and all of the medical studies and clinical trials, and beyond that, it's not replacing it, but beyond that, there's a whole other universe to explore, that now stories will translate at warp speed if they're told well enough. That's the thing. And I think that's where the distribution part does enter into it, is when your story can live online and it gets shared. Well, then no sales team can ever or marketing campaign or ad campaign can ever do what word of mouth can do. It's just not possible. And so Cafe Du Monde has benefited from that, right? Every day people are doing ads for the Mona Lisa, aren't they? Every day. And that's what's happening at Pike Place. And that's what's happening now with, have you heard the story, Clark, about the Savannah bananas?
Actually, yes. I grew up in Georgia, and so I one of my buddy's sons, his team is they're the Bananas because of that team.
Yeah. And yet, how did the Savannah Bananas become like America's favorite minor league baseball team in like what, the last 2 or 3 years?
Yeah.
How did that happen? How do they have 1 billion TikTok views, more than any other team in Major League Baseball? Like, and a waiting list of 250,000 people. It's because Jesse Cole figured out how to create great stories that are very consumable and very shareable. And I think this is, you don't have to, and the beauty of what we're seeing in our work is that you don't even have to have millions. You don't have to be a Kardashian influencer or anything like that, but you can dramatically move the needle with great storytelling, especially if it's told on video in some way, shape, or form.
Listening to this conversation unfold, there's a couple of pieces I want to clearly call out, because there's folks of all degrees of experience listening, different roles. And here's what I want to zero in on is, we've talked a lot about big story. That's my terms, not yours, but company story. What are they doing? What's the impact in the marketplace? And that's one way to leverage this. But this can also be used one-on-one and have influence and impact in your just interpersonal communication with prospects and customers. With when you're talking to somebody that's looking to join the organization, and you want them to join, they want to feel something about coming to work. The story about why you're there can have massive impact about it. So I would encourage folks, whether you're a product manager and you're having discussions with customers, or you're a sales rep that's out there, and take the power of social media and everything off the table. You're literally just having a one-to-one conversation at the moment. Incorporate your story, be able to tell them why you're there. And if you don't have one yet because you don't have enough experience, I would encourage you to latch on to somebody else's and use that. Mm-hmm. Something inspired you to be there. It wasn't just for a paycheck, because many of you guys had opportunity to go other places. What drew you there? What about the culture? What about somebody said something in the interview process and you're just like, this is the place I want to go. I want to make this impact. Use that as your why while you build up your own experience about the patient stories and all these other things. Your customers it'll resonate with them. And it'll also help give you some scale if you don't have the experience of your own yet. I just wanted to point that out. It doesn't have to be just the branding or the story from the company itself.
Right. In fact, Clark, you just made me reflect on one of the things we covered in chapter 12. So in terms of a literary journey, And I would encourage anyone watching or listening, if you get the book, like I want people to actually do the R&D. Zed already knows what the R&D is. Like rob and duplicate every idea in the book and run with it. And that's okay. But here's why, Clark, and you just, kind of triggered it, right? So the book is 12 chapters, and the through line, if you will, there's a through line that connects it all, and it is the day that the legend was created. Okay. So that's consistent in all 12 chapters. Great. We get to so we start in Paris at the Louvre, right? With the theft of the Mona Lisa, which, we've talked about. And then by the time we get to the end, we're crossing iconic Swilcan Bridge in St. Andrews, Scotland. Now, I've never done this before, but we just see that, Clark, that's just an ordinary Callaway golf ball.
Yep.
And yet, but if I tell you that it is actually from the old course in St. Andrews, well, that's a whole other, that adds a little layer of, shall we say, mystique and gravitas to an otherwise ordinary Callaway golf ball.
It certainly does.
So I had a very deeply personal experience in 2016 when I went to St. Andrews, and I was on speaking tours back-to-back years of 2016, 2017 with Vistage International in the United Kingdom. And they put me up in 2016, the first time, at a bed and breakfast 4 minutes from the first tee. And here's why it's personal to me. And I love what you brought it up, how you brought it up too, is that in the end, all business is personal, especially I think with the folks who are watching and listening today. And for me, guys, when I was walking that golf course, like that's the first time, like I get chills remembering, like that's the first time I could actually feel the heritage of my own father. My dad was born 7 minutes from the first tee at St. Andrews. Dad learned how to play the game there. Dad turned pro when at the age of 17, he left and went to Canada to become a golf professional. I had never had that. And Dad's very quiet, really never talked about the old country. He was kind of estranged from his family. And so as kids, my sisters and I, we never grew up with a true appreciation of our Scottish heritage, if you know what I mean. And I can picture, Clark, in that moment, like I'm walking around and what am I picturing? What it would have been like for Dad as a 8-9-year-old kid to be playing this game 36 holes a day some days, right? And then what it meant to him to leave this place and all these different things. So I think, to your point, we all have stories inside us, and many of us have stories, and that was my realization. We have stories we don't even know we have, but they're in there anyway. And with chapter 12, I'm using the literary device called the authentic swing from the great Stephen Pressfield, the author of The Legend of Bagger Vance, that the golfer, whoever, even you guys, right, all have their own authentic swing, which is a metaphor for true self, true identity. It's the golf swing is as unique as a snowflake, a signature, or a thumbprint. That's how unique the golf swing is. And I think the challenge that we're all faced with, quite frankly, is how do we step into our authentic swing? How do we really bring our true self, our true identity? And I think, Clark, that's what your question was kind of bordering on or dialing in on, is you've got to bring something right to that meeting, right to that personal exchange, right?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be this big esoteric thing that happened at the organizational level. It should be at the organizational level as well. Like, why does the company exist? What's the mission statement? Not even the mission statement, like the 3-word reason you guys are doing what you're doing every single day. But at the same time, from a team level, for team identity, or an individual level, again, whether it's VP of marketing having discussions with key opinion leaders, right? There's going to be a lot of facts, but to your point, No kid ever said, hey, tell me a statistic before I go to bed because it's going to help me. They want to know a story. Like, why are you individually there? You could be at a lot of organizations. What's the why, right?
Yeah.
And then the individual contributor out there, why are they selling that? Why are they getting beat up every single day? It's a brutal blood sport. There's a reason why, and you should be able to share that.
And you just touched again on the universality of what this is, right? So, and I think, what folks could do from today is really start to study who's doing it very, very well. Like who's like best in the world. That's how who's best in the world at the position called quarterback other than Drew Brees? It would be Tom Brady, right?
That's right.
Sorry, that was a shameless nod to you guys and your Louisiana roots.
Come on.
But you know what I mean? Like who's best, right? There's 7 billion people on the planet. What, a dozen can play quarterback at the highest level in the NFL? Right? Well, in the art and science of storytelling, well, who's the best? Right? I look at Apple and Nike as two of the best commercial examples from a high level brand point of view. And then I'm looking at Jesse Cole from the Savannah Bananas as being one of the very best right now. And let's face it, minor league baseball teams are a dime a dozen with a lot of empty ballparks, but one guy has figured out how to fill them and make them stand in line. And I think, what we've picked up from the study of legends is people will line up for the legend, which is really demand, right? That's what it is. But you can't create the legend without the story. Like it's all intertwined. And then whoever has the best story is going to win. There might be other cars out there with better, what are the new cars? The electric cars?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's someone with better technology than Tesla, but who's got the highest share price?
Good point.
Right. Whoever has the best story wins. That goes right back to the Mona Lisa. Is St. Andrews, the old course, the absolute best golf course in Scotland? Is it?
Probably not.
Doesn't matter. It's more than it's symbolically, it's more than its 7,305 yards of windswept links on the blustery North Sea coast. It's the holy grail of golf. It's Mecca, Bethlehem, the Vatican. And when we get invited to work with companies, that's one thing we're always zeroing in on. How are you going to create the category of one? And some recent research, I've been holding back a little bit on this because I wanted to see and I wanted to go back and reflect. And you guys with your, science-based backgrounds will appreciate this, but I found this research a little while back, and then I with respect to category of one. Now, many years ago, there was Blue Ocean Strategy, and Seth Godin, a long time ago, wrote about the purple cow, where Big Little Legends, metaphorically, is exploring that same, shall we say, genre, right? How do you create don't be one of many, be the only one, right? And I found this, and I can vouch for it in the sense that that's been my own personal experience. On average, category of one brands earn 76% of the total value created in any market. Like that's significant.
It ain't bad.
Right? And then 24% are fighting for the crumbs. Like that's how lopsided it is. And when you think about the New Orleans coffee market right down the heart of the French Quarter, right, Zed, I'm thinking those numbers would probably be pretty close to accurate describing the phenomena that's Café Du Monde.
Absolutely. I appreciate you joining us today. I think we covered a lot of topics for people to go back and reflect on their own personal story, on the organization story, and wherever they work within the organization, how they can drive the use of story. And your book, Big Little Legends, we'll put a link in the show notes for someone to get easy access to buy that on Amazon. Do you mind if we put your LinkedIn in the show notes as well, in case someone wants to?
Yeah, please do, guys. Listen, I really enjoyed this. I have this feeling we could literally talk for hours. about this topic, because I feel a lot of shared commonalities, and I want to hear more about Zed's affection for Rudy. I can still see number 45 coming off as the linebacker and then making the sack. This was a lot of fun, and hope to get to do it again sometime. So yeah, whatever you want to share, feel free.
So listeners, visit medicalsalesaccelerator.com. When you do so, you can download a resource that's going to help you communicate better with your customers. You can sign up for emails to find out about upcoming episodes, and you can also suggest a guest or a topic for us to cover.
If you found value in today's episode, do a few things for me. Subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, drop us some stars, and lastly, send this episode to your friends, your family, your mama and your daddy. We greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for joining us. Make it a great week, everybody.